I want to move to LGBT equality, because this is an issue that I care a lot about, and I know you have been a champion on. As early as 2013, when you supported a bill called the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, which would have protected LGBT Americans from being fired for their jobs. And now you're the lead sponsor on another bill called the Equality Act, which is a Democratic bill to secure full civil rights protections to LGBT Americans. Now, full disclosure, I run an organization called American Unity Fund that worked to help secure Republican votes for that bill, and it was bipartisan. So it seems to me that the approach that you're pursuing with the Equality Act is different from the approach you pursued with employment non-discrimination.
Well, so let's turn the clock back to 2013. It was all Democrats signed on.
Yeah.
It was very difficult to get Republicans. I finally got it to several hearings, said we've got to put this on the floor so that people have to take a stand. As it turned out, we were able to bring, at the last second, really, at the last second, brought a group of, and thank you for helping make that happen.
Yep.
So I'm counting on you when we finally get the Equality Act on the floor of the U.S. Senate to help us bring folks across. And that Equality Act says, let's turn to the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Mm-hmm. It's been adjudicated. We understand everything it means. And put equality of opportunity for our LGBTQ community on the same foundation. And that's the beauty of it, because it isn't just mortgages or financial instruments or ability to serve on a jury or employment. It's saying the same foundation of opportunity as every other American.
Well, there are Republicans in the Senate who have taken pro-LGBT votes, who ought to be willing to sign on to this and be co-sponsors, but they're not. And some of them, have real concerns that the Equality Act, for example, is written so broadly that it's quite difficult for Republicans to support it. Even though they support LGBT equality, for example, there's a provision that potentially implicates abortion. And so a pro-life Republican like Rob Portman, who's also pro-LGBT, would have a hard time signing on. And there are a couple of planks and provisions. Conservatives' criticism of the Equality Act isn't that it's anti-LGBT, but it's that it's written so broadly that it precludes passage.
Well, that was the same position we were in with the Employment Non-Discrimination Act. And it was very difficult to bring people across. But when they say too broadly, they're talking about the same foundation on which we address race and gender. And so I don't think that's too broad. That's opportunity for all.
Well, I appreciate that that's what you say. That's not what conservatives are saying. I mean, conservatives think this bill is loaded with poison pills. Why not write a bill that is narrow, that you know you can get Republican support on, Republicans who we know are on the record supporting LGBT freedom in order to secure their votes? It seems like there's a pragmatic approach and there's an ideological approach, one intended to gin up a progressive base and another that could simply get the job done and protect LGBT freedom.
Well, quite frankly, this was saying that our LGBTQ community deserves the same protection as we have on race and gender. I don't think that's too broad, and I don't think it's about ginning up a base. I think it's about fairness of opportunity. The main pushback I've had is folks saying we still want to let organizations like hospitals, Catholic hospitals, discriminate and only hire people, even like custodians. And like, you can't discriminate on the basis of race and gender in that situation. Why should you be able to discriminate against our LGBTQ community?
Well, the criticism, as I understand it, with respect to religious organizations, is that the federal government funds religious organizations like Catholic charities, like religious hospitals. It could risk the entirety of their funding if they refuse to agree with all of the Equality Act's provisions, rather than just risking their funding in a narrow space that deals with LGBT service, people that they're providing services to.
Well, I'm just standing on the firm foundation of 1964 and saying if you're hiring a janitor and you can't discriminate on race, you shouldn't be able to discriminate on the status of who a person is or whom they love.
I agree that you shouldn't be able to discriminate based on who they are. But in the recent ruling of Masterpiece Cake Shop versus the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, well, the court punted on the fundamental questions in that case, 7-2, with Kagan and Breyer joining Kennedy. They basically gave us some guidelines that there is going to need to be a way to balance religious freedom with full protections to LGBT people and public accommodations and others. It just seems like we should be able to go at it with a scalpel rather than a hatchet, and to be able to sort of still fund these organizations who do very good work and potentially not fund the places that are viewed as discriminatory.
When folks go into the public place, they're taking public funds, they are opening their doors to the public. It's a time to stop discriminating. And this is a core question that comes up, you know, in the wedding cake cases where folks say, hey, I want to be able to run my business the way I want. And it's the same argument that was made for discrimination against African Americans. We got past that. We need to get past it here and have the same foundation.
At the expense of sincerely held religious beliefs that aren't, from people who aren't discriminatory in any way. But in the cases of, you know, I mean, that was the issue in the Masterpiece Cake Shop case, which, by the way, the court decided not to rule on. But, I mean, what they've said is there may be cases where sincerely held religious beliefs by individuals who have described and displayed no other animus to LGBT people, there may be a way to protect religious freedom. And not only there may be, there will be a way to protect religious freedom and LGBT freedom, and that they can exist in concert with one another.
I would just encourage people to think about standing at the door, and when you have put up your sign, you're open for business, whether you get to stand there and let one person in and slam the door on the next.
Which, by the way, the court said you're not going to be able to do. And Kennedy said that in his opinion, and I agree with you. Nobody should be denied services to the general public. If you're open to the public, you're open to the public, and that was, I think, one of the things that they laid to rest in that case. But I'd